All right, I think we're live. So I don't know if anybody watched the other video thoroughly. I know it was long and it wasn't meant to veer off into the geoengineering stuff, but it's hard not to make correlations with what we've heard or read in other channels like Dane Wigington and Jim Lee Climate Viewer Guy's channel. And Dane Wigington has done a lot of research, I think, for the past 10 or 15 years. And I know Jim Lee has done some similar stuff, but his tends not to go, it's not the same information. He's actually tracking a lot of live technology as it's deployed or weather patterns and things like that as well. And he's also gone into the chemicals, and I think he actually appeared before the EPA in Congress, maybe giving testimony or something like. I forgot. It's those guys have a lot of content around this stuff. So the barium, titanate, and strontium. So barium and strontium and aluminum have been referenced often in what is being sprayed from the planes. And there's multiple stories for why it's being done online, like solar engineering, protecting us from the heat, cooling, rainmaking. I think those are the top three right there. But some of the research that I did in one of the previous videos, actually the video right before this one, yesterday, showed barium was being used as a way to help identify the aurora or the electromagnetic field that the body emits when it's going into an energetic state. And energetic also, I'm just going to say energetic for now, but it means psychoenergetic, or when someone's potentially exhibiting their ESP or telepathy or anything like that. So I just went into the CIA CREST library and looked up barium titanate. And the first document I pulled up, it might be a little large here, was this one here. In the piezoelectric properties of some titanates and zirconates of bivalent metals that possess a perovskite type structure. Let's look up what perovskite means. Calcium titanium oxide mineral composed. I doubt it's going to say anything related to anything we're looking for, but let's see. So solar cells are made of it or contain it. So anyways, I found this one, and this one I was just looking for barium. And it actually, while I was reading it, it's this paragraph here. Investigations by Wall and Goldman showed that barium titanate is piezoelectric. Recently, many works have been devoted to the study of the properties of barium titanate and its compounds. In particular, it was found that solid solutions of barium titanate with strontium and lead are also piezoelectric. The Curie temperature of solid solutions decreases and increases with the amount of strontium. I don't see statement of the problem. So this doesn't say anything about Stargate, and it was found in the general library. That's just one. Let's see what else we can find here. Scientific abstract. Maybe we'll try it like this. If you're not familiar with any of the geoengineering concerns or anything like that, you're not going to find any of this interesting. And I would definitely recommend looking at Dane Wigington's channel or Jim Lee Climate Viewer's channel, as well as his website. They both have tons of research, independent research, their own FOIAs that they've had to file against the government to figure out what's going on. My contention here, or my connection, or my correlation, was with the fact that we were potentially being sprayed as a way for them to, or them being whomever. Let's just, I'm not going to try to confine if it's the government or private sector, or whoever's running the program, but the idea was that most likely they were using this as a way to identify people when they exhibit their abilities. So we know that aura cameras are real, night vision's real, heat vision is real. There's all various ways in the past probably 40 years that all that has been advanced upon. And then with the emissions that we get from our phones, 5G, specific lights on street corners, which have been shown to ionize the atmosphere, and also just using radiance from a light is also a way to identify a body or a person. So the idea sort of is that if we're being saturated with these chemicals, and I've been personally told that these chemicals are everywhere, they're in the water, they're in the food, they're on everybody. There's not really a way to filter them out. I don't know what their purpose is, but most of the research on this specific channel, on Zero State channel here, is the ESP stuff and telepathy and ongoing programs that went black around. I think officially the last little bit of research that I was able to find was on 2001, 2002, where there were still a few documents that were contemporary to their release date in terms of time. So if it was in 1995, it was being released in 2001, 2002. So I don't see anything here. Atomic energy. And then if we're being saturated with these chemicals, then we're going to show up on screen. Another interesting correlation is that there's also patents in this CIA CREST library for the CIA had, where they had tube TVs. These were the big hot, deep dish, deep TVs that were prevalent in the the 80s and 90s. But they had a patent where they were able to pull a soft image from the TV. So basically what that meant is that the TV was watching you, and it was able to pull and send back a soft image of an outline or people or figures, or letting them know how many people were in front of the TV at the time. So let's fast forward again, and again, these may sound like stretches, but they shouldn't. I mean, if everybody has an iPhone or a mobile phone right now, they realize it's pretty advanced technology. If we look at what HD TV is, and the flat screens and all these things, and Xbox and gaming consoles and gaming stations and virtual reality and the way they all work, it's possible that even specific monitors, which I've made this claim about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, that Dell and ViewSonic had specific monitors that were able to do something similar, especially when you're within a 100-foot radius of your Wi-Fi, or you're in a public space and you're just basically being saturated with Wi-Fi or 5 or 4G or 3G, whatever it was at the time. So it's the assumption or presumption is the monitors are also monitoring us as well. And if you go back into some of the older videos, and I'm sure everyone's heard this stuff already before, especially if you're watching this video. Sorry for the lip sucking. It's been a long day in the sun. I'm a little dehydrated, but some of the earlier videos here show neural networks using the phones and being able to use your phone as an EEG readout. So if the phone was able to be modded and turned into something like that, where you're able to read or capture that kind of data from someone, then it's quite possible that the government or private corporations have had that ability or technology or for a while, right? There's been prototypes prior to whatever has been released to the consumer at this date. Let's try strontium. Again, it's just an assumption, but if I were an evil mad scientist or a good mad scientist, whatever you want to look at it, it's not a far stretch for me or someone as far deep in this type of research for myself to say that a lot of the saturation isn't the sky, the spraying and all that stuff is not for blocking out the sun. I actually took some video today, and I'll post that up after this live stream, clearly showing planes doing like curves and lines where there are no flights and things like that. So, and they were spraying and separating out, and they weren't actually making clouds. The stream and the trail were spreading out and then just falling. And there have been days where I've been on like a 19-story building, and I've watched the material collect on the banister. It was so heavy that the material was actually on the banister of the balcony that I was standing on watching it occur, because it gets so thick, and it actually does collect a little bit. So it looks like I'm going to have to do a lot more research here. I thought I was going to find something a little bit more relevant right off the bat. Let's just go back to the first one. Finish reading through it and see what we can see. See what we can see. Let's close up this window here for now, move it down. Barium is somewhat different from other titanates and zirconates. We read that already in the Wikipedia article. There's going to have to be a lot of learning of new words to get through whatever this stuff is here. So okay, so that somehow still falls under piezoelectric. Well, there you go. I mean, it's the electric charge that accumulates in certain solid materials, such as crystals, ceramics, and biological matter, such as bone, DNA, and various proteins. So my assumption really isn't that far off. Even if you don't believe in either energetics or telepathy or ESP, or if you're someone who doesn't believe in the geoengineering programs, it's clear that these, in some way or another, whether it was one group or another group, however you want to look at it, the Air Force was involved with research into this, and either they've been spraying us in order to look at to kind of watch us on live screen somehow, I guess. I don't know how necessarily that would work unless you're flying above, and it's possible that a lot of the helicopters in metropolitan areas those large round cameras that are on there do more than just take close-up pictures. So the piezoelectric effect results from the linear electromechanical interaction between the mechanical and electrical states in crystalline materials with no inversion symmetry. We know that there's certain compounds in our bodies that are crystal. The piezoelectric effect is a reversible process. Materials exhibiting the effect also exhibit the reverse effect. So if they're positively, with the weather modification stuff too, we know that there's atmospheric ionization, both negative and positive. And then also with the way that the NSA had theorized that they could initially cryptological aspects of ESP incite someone to show their potential or express that energy somehow, was also using negative and positive ionization of the atmosphere, war theater, stress. I'm going to scroll quick here for those people who don't like fully controlled conditions. Let me find it. That actually looks like a page I have not seen. So there's often multiple copies of the same document, and sometimes, like this is actually new here, and sometimes some of it's actually blocked out, you know, and marked to be sensitive material still, and other times it's available in another document. The potential threat is: there is significant evidence supporting the existence of the phenomena and its connection with frustration. The famous psychiatrist Hans Bender investigated two celebrated cases in Germany, the Rosenheim case and the Bremen Boy case. That's not what we're looking for. We're close, though. Actually, before I forget, let's pop this up too. So Kirlian photography is a collection of photographic techniques used to capture the phenomenon of electrical coronal discharges. It is named after Semyon Kirlian, electrography, electrophotography, and it's quite possible that this technique has been modified or updated since the 60s and 70s when it was brought into the CIA to experiment with and work with. So again, Russian literature, that's interesting how much the NSA has borrowed from Russian literature. So back to the ESP document, I just want to find the part where they get into deterrence. So defense against ESP, this may be it. As an extrasensory perception does appear to pose a threat to U.S. communication security, it is of considerable concern to determine how defenses might be erected against such an attack. ESP is seen to be an effect of the empathetic bond. This has been firmly established in Soviets as well as a free world research. Kamansky, the Soviet, when transmitting to his receiver Nikolov, concentrated on being angry at him. Dr. Thelma Moss of UCLA uses emotionally charged films to stimulate feelings of threat in the transmitter. In the E. Douglas, so there's a little bit of MK Ultra mixed in with that. The transmitter concentrated on people that Dean either greatly disliked or cared about. Although no known defense could be called foolproof against a talented psychic, It is evident from years of research and experience that anything which degrades the intensity of the bond between the perceiver and the object or person of concern is a defense. So that's anything that degrades the bond. But what we're talking about here, what I'm assuming and talking about, is actually identifying the bond by saturating us with barium and strontium and positive and negative ions in the atmosphere, and then filming it when people, just picture a camera, a helicopter flying overhead, and a riot breaks out, and everything, people are arrested, they go to court, and the judge wants to find out, the lawyers want to prove who actually started it or anything like that. I mean, if this were filming and they were able to capture this in real time, you're basically looking for the violence, right? Who went into that, whatever glow, whatever color showed up on screen, whatever it's presented as on screen, who exhibited that first. That wouldn't necessarily mean that they're guilty, because we know that a lot of those types of situations can also be coordinated, but which means that whoever gave the order could have been passively, hiding somewhere else. As noted in Chapter 6, the test scenes declined when the two subjects began to dislike each other and become bored with the tests. For many years, researchers have complained about the decline factor, which is in most tests is caused by the tedium of doing the same thing over and over again in a boring manner. While mild doses of drugs and alcohol seem to enhance the ESP factor in some perceivers, heavy drugs or alcohol have a destructive effect on ESP. Research has consistently indicated that a distracted, calm, dreamy state is good for reception of ESP material, but it is poor for transmission. A state of confusion in the subject, especially when engendered in a skeptical environment, has always been observed to hinder the PSI factor. Where negative ionization of a mild nature seems to enhance perception, positive ionized atmosphere inhibits and makes a person nervous and depressed. While intense concentration is good for transmitting telepathically, it is a poor condition for reception. From time immemorial, it has been reported that enclosing oneself deep within the one who is a very strong protection against such attacks of perception. The above defenses are principally passive, but there are reports from primitive people. We don't need to use this. Uncareful use. Okay, so maybe I gotta go back 1 second. No. So summary. Uncareful use of either offensive or defensive psychic powers is exceedingly dangerous. The fanatical Hitler experience, where a society of criminal leadership thrust open an occult horror chamber which cost 50 million dead, should be, we must proceed with caution. This is not the full document. Let's look at this one here. Research into the cryptological aspects of ESP. This paper, together with the appendixes and enclosures, is intended to present the first of a series of contributions toward a more complete knowledge of certain special factors bearing on threats to ComSec. This may be one of them. This document actually to isolate subjects which appear to be capable of demonstrating a more efficient use than the average person, to provide a vehicle for testing such subject in order to learn more about the factors which enhance or inhibit the operation. So these documents, I may have to pull up something else. Research into psychokinesis indicates spontaneous episodes and controlled experiments have an electromagnetic effect. An experiment is being designed to test the effectiveness of PK in jamming modern low-voltage electronic communication security equipment. The guys that were actually involved in this, that were the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, although I think it was perceived as a comedy, those guys have gone on to give interviews now, and you can find those online, where I guess one guy was actually famous for being able to jam communications. And what's ironic is that the same guy who's interviewing him, Jeffrey Mishlove, is the host of the New Thinking Aloud, he's quoted in these documents as saying anybody who's able to jam electronic communications would have to be destroyed. So there's that's a little weird that he's now on YouTube interviewing those people. Some spontaneous PK events have indicated that persons with a low frustration tolerance and no normal outlet for this energy are prone to release this pent-up force through the unusual PK channel. Being aware of these relationships, we are designing our experiments around such persons and suitable frustrating stimulus, which they can only halt during a specified period of time by using PK to alter voltage in a targeted circuit. So I didn't actually find a specific document unless I just skipped over it in this one. But you get the idea, and you can actually research these two documents here. So what's interesting is, again, is in the document that I went through briefly yesterday, the Warsaw Pact document, which was the Czechoslovakian, Russian, Ukraine, the Eastern Bloc countries' research that we either intercepted or that they had supplied us in establishing the Warsaw Pact, which is perceived, the actual Warsaw Pact itself is perceived as an ideological opposite of NATO. It's not a war-driven effort, but it is an ideological effort. So the document that I referenced was a DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency document that included that material, and their research was stemming from the 20s and 30s, and they had already begun developing programs for recruitment and things like that. So the NSA, again, this is an NSA document. If you look right here, or in the URL, that's a CIA document, or CIA FOIA of an NSA document. It is strongly recommended that the agency seek out to isolate super guessers. That makes sense. I know what that means. No, I'll have to find it again. Testing for cryptological aspects. Let's look at that one. You'll see that all this stuff is in the Stargate program. Stargate, if you're new to this, Stargate is not the only name. There's Grill Flame, Center Lane, Gondola Wish, Dragoon Absorb, another one too. The purpose of ESP experiments described in threefold. This is not the same one either. Good thing I have copies. Actually, I did a reading of this already, so this is these videos, the original reading. If for some reason documents are now missing from the CIA CREST library, the reading is available in my video list on this channel. This looks like a previous version, or maybe this document was a consolidation. I'm sorry. This document's a total consolidation of this document and this document. Yeah, it looks like that. So, okay, so they also mentioned, just to go over it again and make sure that my point was clear, that the ionization of the atmosphere has detrimental effects. War theater stress, things like that have detrimental effects. So you have kind of two things here. It is deterring people from exhibiting it, and then when people do exhibit it, how do we identify them when they're exhibiting it? So if barium and strontium and aluminum are being sprayed on everybody, and those are shown to be able to just, I guess, absorb or, let's look at the words again. Hold the accumulated charge that's been proven that we all, I guess, discharge in some way or another through electromagnetism, as well as mentioned in the earlier video yesterday, the scalar wave technology, which is supposedly or allegedly predicated off of Tesla's knowledge, and there's no known defense against scalar per a lieutenant colonel. McClevey, I think his name is. So you can see that there's been study with scalar waves. If you're interested in this stuff, that happens to be in Stargate again, so somehow the scalar wave technology. Verbal request for summary statement on scalar waves. These are unconventional waves that are not necessarily a contradiction to Maxwell's equations, as some have suggested, but might represent an extension understanding at the time. If realizable, the scalar wave could represent a new form of wave propagation that could penetrate seawater, resulting in a new method of submarine communications and possibly a new form of technology for ASW. Thus, the potential applications are high interest to the U.S. R&D community and the intelligence community. They go through. So the fact that this is in the Stargate, even though it may not mention Stargate, shows that it was filed along with this for a specific reason. And apparently, again, the Josephine function was mentioned in yesterday's video, but apparently even a Faraday cage does not inhibit psychic or telepathic or anything like that. So with the inclusion or the acceptance of electromagnetism in a bioelectromagnetic field, as well as the, let's say, the discovery of the scalar wave, they now have a premise to build a defense against on as well. And remember, they're not like it's not even like it's a defense. It's just how do we deter it from even showing up, right? So you have passivity, boredom, stress, war theater, not giving anybody any time to really focus on anything. The other idea is drugs, and in one fashion, they tell us that in some capacity drugs and alcohol help. In others, they say it doesn't. I don't know. It looks like I mentioned yesterday, there's just a couple contingents inside these intelligence agencies where some people wanted to bring it to the forefront, where the Army had their budget taken away from them and it was not approved, and the DIA took control over the CIA's research of Stargate and Center Lane, and then underlining all of that, the NSA had already 10 years prior to the CIA's research had begun working on countermeasures which involved barium and strontium being used in the technology to help them capture and register the event as it occurred in participants or talents or adepts. So the idea then in short is how do you make somebody glow on screen, right? How do you make them glow up in light during the day or during the night when they are exhibiting their ability, and how do we capture that? Well, it's you give everybody a node in their home, and that node is basically your Wi-Fi router with 5G or 4G, or in a metropolitan area you put 5G on every corner, so it basically saturates every 100 feet, every 200 feet, 300 feet. Everybody has a transmitter in their car or their GPS or anything like that. So, and then we know that the cameras and the technology exist to capture all kinds of bioelectrical data outside of what we just might see on TV, which is typically the heat vision or night vision. So there are other ways to capture energy forms. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch for me to say that that's potentially what's happening. The weather modification stuff, when I first saw it, I really originally thought they were using it to test, I tried to be idealistic about it and say that I thought they were testing, wind patterns, and they wanted to see what kind of things were happening. But when you've seen enough photography that other people have taken and you've actually started to film it and shoot it yourself, you do recognize that what's also happening is that the clouds, the so-called clouds that appear, they're pattern forming. They have patterns in them, and clouds don't have geometric patterns like that. So it's quite possible that the stuff that they're spraying in the atmosphere is also identifying either a natural terrestrial magnetism that circulates around the Earth, or identifying radio communications and transmissions. And the Army actually has a method for bouncing their communications off of the cloud. In that cloud, if it's a sunny day, the sun actually, a bright sun makes it harder for them to communicate. I'm not sure if I'm going to find it right away here. Let me try bouncing. So the solar shield thing doesn't really make any sense. Oh, let's look at this one here. So knew all about the U.S. work to see all the RF, RI, and other electromagnetic energy coming out of people's bodies, and to correlate this with different physical states. Well, that was serendipitous that I found this. So this was a treat. So Cryptolog, again, another NSA document. Cryptolog was an internal newsletter that was circulated around NSA employees, or program, whatever program they were part of. And there you go. It says Aura readers right there. Work is almost the same as that as what Aura readers are doing in spectrophotometry. So they just combined everything. It's just, there's basically a geomagnetic fence in the home on the ground. Say most 5G can only go about 100 feet right now. They just increased the spec, so it's about 100 feet. It used to only be about 10 to 50 feet. So you got 100 feet now, and then if you talk about commercialization over industrialization of it for the state or military, they probably got 200, 300, 400 feet. So if it's in a radius and that's on the ground, that's going up at least to 9 floors, 9 floors. And then you have the ionospheric heaters that are used for weather modification, which in turn negatively and positively ionize the atmosphere to induce certain weather patterns. And then, on a more contemporary level, like today, like what we're hearing in the news today, when we look at what the president's dealing with in terms of sex trafficking and things like that, and the amount of children that go missing, and this sort of this notion of the the blood drinking and stuff like that, the draining of the pineal gland, and or in less extreme versions we hear of the fluoridated water vaccines and things like that, where it's the entire premise, or from a lot of people, a lot of deep researchers, the premise is to calcify the pineal gland so they cannot use their third eye. And then we have, the NSA's deterrent and identification methods. Could be the DoD, could be the DIA, could be anybody. I don't know who it is. But it's clear that the inventions were made, and if some guy sitting at their computer can go through this research and find this stuff and connect the dots and make the correlations, then it's not unlike it's possible that someone else did this 20 or 30 years ago, right? Let's not pat ourselves on the back or think that this is so complicated. This is what these people were doing. They would solve incredible challenges, and like I mentioned yesterday on the video, there was a lot of occult training given to CIA personnel and NSA personnel, and there's the historical references to the NSA and CIA being sort of a newer version of the OSS, and the OSS being basically Nazi scientists coming over, and the Nazi scientists being involved in occult research. And then if we just step away from all of that, we just look at our typical research as it relates to religion, philosophy from the past 500 years, secret fraternities, secret societies, and things like that. Most of the ascension myths and ideas, those or the Christ consciousness, which is kind of a more new age term from the 80s, I think, and 90s, or the light bearers, right? Light bearing from Masonry, or let's say Nazarene and Essenes, the wearing the crown being the angelic halo around your head. Excuse me. It's clear that they used science to prove it, and then used science to hinder it, and potentially track children who are exhibiting this. Part of the, you may not have made that correlation. Let me read this real quick. Much of the there are apparently problems of image and semantics for the research center. So that's actually something I should have said too, is that while the CIA and the NSA were doing this, there were also many privately funded and independent hospitals going back to 20s and 30s who had already begun doing their own research. So they had their own private libraries. Whether or not, I mean, when you read these documents, these declassified documents from the CIA, a lot of times they'll have a references or a bibliography or something like that, which basically encompasses all the books and all the literature that already existed that they had to go out and find themselves. All of that research and literature had come from private institutions and private funding. So you have things like Mount Sinai, Johns Hopkins, Maimonides, a lot of different hospitals were doing their own research, and some of those were even, I think a lot of those hospitals are also associated with the dark history of the MK Ultra programs, various versions of that, as it metamorphized into different programs, and further back the ideas of psychiatric wards and things like that, and the terrible experiments that went on then, and the human rights issues and violations. A lot of people forget that stuff, where people were just being told they were crazy and all this other stuff. And basically what was happening, if we look at it with a more modern lens with what we have now to look at, it's quite possible that these doctors and physicians, or they knew what the patient was experiencing, which was most likely a telepathic experience, or they had a little bit of telepathy or latent ability, and they were bringing these people in to subject them to experiments. And on a lesser negative note, a term that's referenced in the research from the CIA and NSA as well is the believing community. And I think I made a misnomer of that when I mentioned it in previous videos, but I think the way Targ and Puthoff meant the believing community was that their original sort of statement, to paraphrase it a little bit, is that the believing community was always more receptive and performed better at the tasks, and that may and most likely actually means people who believed in telepathy and ESP in the first place. I, through a lot of my own esoteric research, though, really kind of attribute prayer to the same metaphysical qualitative effect as ESP or telepathy, where prayer is a form of telepathy. It would make sense, whether you want to call it spiritual or I don't know, scientific, whatever label you want to give it. So a lot of the religious groups themselves were also, those groups were what were basically funding the hospitals. And then if we go back a little bit further in our history to the stories that we hear of the Catholic Church and suppression of reading and writing and a lot of other things, and their private archive, their private library, and all this stuff, it's quite possible. I mean, it's not a stretch to say that the idea or the reason for doing this was to just basically eliminate these traits in people altogether. Whereas the NSA and CIA and DOD and DIA, instead of eliminating it, they're just going to suppress you if you don't act the way they want you to act. But if you do act the way they're going to act, maybe you get recruited, maybe you get spotted, maybe you get brought in. And with that too, I have to bring up again, just kind of reiterate it because it's such a popular thing that's going on in pop culture right now, is that, remember in the previous document, I think on the cryptological aspects here, they said that stress, frustration, and things like that usually bring the ability up. They make it surface in the individual. as well as providing them in like a chaos magic scenario where they're distracted and people are just straight out lying to them, where they just can't figure out what's going on, either spiritually or in the situation literally, because people are deliberately trying to make everything seem unpredictable, specifically to keep you from predicting the outcome. But we have the X-Men, we have super soldiers, we have the Incredible Hulk, we have Spider-Man, we have all these from the 50s and 60s, really the 60s, and before that, right? We have Uberman, right? Ubermensch being Superman, basically meaning Superman in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So it all kind of fits and piggybacks on one another when you look at the I don't want to say predictive programming, but just say the programming or the inspiration or the idea of using mass media and content to, instead of people going through the original mastery school and mystery school or religious schools of initiates and becoming an initiate, they basically created a lot of pop culture around those ideas, and then basically had technology or spotters or, art teachers, school teachers, who knows, caseworkers for abuse, any number of doctors, physicians in these hospitals, psychiatrists, parapsychologists, any number of people basically reporting back to the mothership of CIA, NSA, DOD, DIA, saying, hey, look, we've got a couple talented people here. They come from a broken home. What can we do with this here? So there's a lot to absorb for the average listener who has no familiarity with any of this. However, it's not a stretch of the imagination to put all this together in that fashion. The main point of this video today was the geoengineering aspect, which I think I've proven that. I mean, if Dan Wigington's research is correct, and if Jim Lee's research is correct, and if their freedom of information requests are accurate, and if the myths that we hear about the Department of Energy and a few other government agencies are correct, the entire premise is what I've said before, is like a parallel construction where we make 4 or 5 different reasons for the program to exist. Each group is given a different reason or a different task within that reason, right? There's one group just monitor solar energy. Another group is just monitor the bioelectromagnetism that we get from the city. Another group is, hey, we need better cameras to zoom in and see this stuff. The other group is, we need a stronger pulse wave, but we're knocking people out. People are falling asleep at the wheel. They're crashing. All kinds of things are happening when people are getting sick and vomiting, and kids are being born with defects. How do we make this better? It's not a hard reach. It's not a big reach at all. All right, so the next video I do, I'm actually going to go back to reading another one of the documents. I actually downloaded something from Targ and put off that I want to read and just get it onto some video. But I'm going to stop this here. All right, share this, or as usual, do your own research and check out these other guys' videos here. This is definitely informative stuff on the geoengineering and weather modification and climate change and greenhouse gases and carbon emissions and all this stuff that we're being told, which to me just appears to be a black budget, dark budget kind of thing, where these programs have been going on and to determine the effect of human extra perceptive capabilities, finding talents, finding adepts. I don't know that any cases have ever appeared before a judge where they were able to use this technology to identify or prove or disprove a specific intent within a case, but that may not even be the issue itself. I would even speculate that if someone had committed a crime, intentionally or by accident, using these types of abilities, it's most likely that the rareness of that individual within the whole spectrum, and when I say that, it's there's documentation that right now up to 5% of the population is actively using it. You know, in the 80s they said 1%, and then they said within 10 to 20 years, 10 to 20 million people will be using it actively, or maybe even consciously even. So if there's only 1 to 5% people actively, consciously using it, they also admitted that everyone most likely has the capability, and that it might even be down to specific genes, DNA, and bloodlines. So you can wrap a lot of the conspiracy type stuff that we hear about all kinds of other initiatives, whether it be secret fraternities, hidden weapons, and false flags, and all this other stuff. You can integrate a lot of that into this. But the idea overall is recruitment, spotting, tracking, suppression, and then where do these people go? What do they do? What are they actually doing? All right, have a good night, good morning, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this.